Hello everyone, welcome back. I am Kris. This was requested. This is Rise and Fall of the Khazar Khaganate. Did I butcher that or was I close? Khaganate? Khaganate? Khaganate. That was not right. All right, well, we're going to say that. This, I was thinking 2 videos, but this will be 25 plus minutes, and that's a little too long. So this will be 3 17-ish or minute videos. Thumbs up, subscribe, and then if you can click on that thanks button, well, thumbs up and subscribe, please. Otherwise, the channel doesn't grow. And if the channel doesn't grow, what am I doing? So then there's also the thanks button. That's voluntary. You can click on that, donate to the channel, request a video. Your name sponsors that video. Okay, let's get into it.
The problem with most conquests is that they only breed more wars and violence, and each time an empire expands its borders, new enemies are waiting further afield. Such was the case in the middle of the 7th century when the Umayyad Caliphate expanded into the South Caucasus region, only to become enemies with the Turkic Khazar Khanate immediately. Even though the Umayyads were replaced by the Abbasids soon after, the conflicts between the Arabs and Khazars continued for 150 years. In this video, we will talk about the Arab-Khazar Wars, many battles and raids that happened during them, as well as the diplomatic situation involving the Kievan Rus, Volga Bulgars, Eastern Romans, and many others, as we describe the rise and fall of the Khazar Khanate. This week, our YouTube members and patrons will be watching the next installment in our series on the Second Punic War. The Carthage free in terms of our weekly exclusive war, history of course, and much. Much has been written of the conflict support. Much has been written of the conflicts between the Eastern Roman Empire and its Asian rival powers, the Sassanid Empire of Persia and the Arab Caliphates. But throughout nearly the whole of these long struggles, a third major power lay to the north, less well remembered, but a vital part of the history of Europe and Asia both. This was the Khazar Khaganate, a Turkic kingdom that never fully abandoned its nomadic origins, even as it established a wealthy, sophisticated kingdom, recognized as an important regional power by its settled neighbors, and afforded all the respect of a fellow empire. The earliest recorded entrance of the Khazars into European history is possibly as part of the Hunnic Empire of Attila, with a tribe referred to by Roman diplomat and chronicler Priscius as the Akatsias, who were led by a chief called Karadach, listed among Attila's vassals in 448. The Romans approached Karadach with bribes as part of an effort to undermine Attila's confederation, but these
We talking about Attila the Hun?
efforts failed, with Karadach keeping the bribe but spurning Roman efforts to goad him into rebellion. Though the connection of these Akatsias to the later Khazars is disputed and far from definite, a later Arab account of the Khazar Khaganate does detail the social division between so-called Ak-Khazar and Kara-Khazar, or white and black Khazars, seemingly a division of social class, with the Ak-Khazar fitting the Akatsia name given by a diplomat who would only have been dealing with the elites and leadership. Whether the Khazars were indeed part of Attila's confederation, or the Akatsiri, an unrelated Hunnic tribe, concrete evidence of their presence and power would emerge with the 6th century reign of Sassanid Shahenshah Khosrow Anushirvan, who recorded victories against them and built fortifications to ward off their raids, but also married a Khazar bride in a short-lived bid for alliance. The Western Turkic Khaganate, or Gökturks, took the place of Attila's Hunnic Empire between the mid-6th and mid-7th centuries, but even while subordinate to this new power, the Khazars loomed larger than before in accounts of the era, though the use of Khazar by many Roman sources to refer to the Turkic Khaganate as a whole.
So I did a quick read, and I read that as Hercules, and I was like, huh? Sorry, my apologies. But I have to share stupidity from time to time.
Makes some accounts difficult to attribute properly. Still, it is clear that alongside raids into Georgia and Armenia, Khazar warriors made their way onto many battlefields, often as allies or mercenaries fighting for the Eastern Romans, but at other times battling against them as fierce foes. In 627, while the Prophet Muhammad was leading the first Muslims and the warriors of Medina against Mecca, an alliance between the Western Khagan Tongyabgu and Rome was formed, with his vassal Khazar horsemen playing a major role in Emperor Heraclius' campaign against Persia. This formed the beginnings of a partnership that would hold largely intact through the coming century of war with the Caliphate that both powers would endure. The actions of the Khazars during this last Byzantine-Sassanid war would also highlight how quickly their nation was taking up the trappings of their more settled neighbours. Upon capturing the city of Tbilisi from the Sassanids, the Khazar Khan is recorded to have sent envoys to examine the work of the city's artists and craftsmen, with the recorded techniques and resettled talent proving in the long term a richer prize than plunder from the city's sacking. While this may instead refer to Tongyabgu, as previously mentioned, the growing wealth and production base of the Khazars is also demonstrated by its armies, with consistent descriptions of well-armoured Khazar horsemen setting them apart from the nomadic light cavalry armies of their neighbours. Unfortunately, the collapse of the Sassanids would bring a new enemy to the Khazars' doorstep barely a decade later. The explosive period of Islamic expansion under Caliph Umar and the legendary general Khalid ibn al-Walid coincided with a period of similar turmoil and transformation in the steppes, with the Gökturks losing control of their western vassals as a result of their subjugation by Tang China, even as Arab armies were first reaching the Caucasus. The Khazars would thus quickly find themselves thrust into a conflict on multiple fronts, sucked into the power vacuum left by their diminished former overlord. 642 would be a pivotal year on both fronts, and see the Khazars meet both victory and defeat. Abd al-Rahman ibn Rabia led the first Arab attacks out of recently conquered Byzantine Syria and Persian Mesopotamia into the Caucasus Mountains, swiftly seizing Derbent and the extensive Sassanid fortifications guarding the route along the Caspian coast, called Bab al-Abwab, or the Gate of Gates, by the Arabs. Political power in the region was in a state of flux, as the empires that had long contested it reeled from their recent defeats. Armenia and Georgia seem to have been functionally independent at the time, not coming under formal Arab suzerainty for several more years, while the Dagestan region of the North Caucasus still hosted Persian governors left behind by the Sassanids, who were now paying their tribute to the Khazar Khagan. The Arab invasion would initially progress without resistance. Though it lacked the numbers to firmly establish lasting Arab control in the Caucasus, the army did win a pledge of allegiance from Derbent's governor, Sharabaraz, who negotiated to have his and his garrison's military service against the Khazars accepted as the city's tribute in place of the customary jizya tax. Unsatisfied with this victory, Abd al-Rahman made it his goal to cross the river Aras and capture Balanjar, the nearest city under direct Khazar rule. Little is recorded of his first attempt during the reign of Umar, though it seems no significant battle was fought. Ignoring a rather fanciful claim credited to Abd al-Rahman's own brother that angels protected him from the Khazars' attacks, it appears the defending forces chose to fortify themselves within Balanjar upon his approach, with the overextended commander turning back with his plunder rather than risking a long siege with so much unfriendly territory behind him. Still, the lack of a major Khazar response to this first attack led him to make repeated incursions north of Derbent over the next decade, raiding with near impunity. The reason the Khazars offered so little resistance against these initial Arab incursions was likely because they were tied up dealing with another rival in the west, the Bulgars of the Volga River, who had emerged as the other major competitor in the steppe power vacuum. Though a precise chronology is harder to establish on the steppes, the Khazar-Bulgar showdown probably occurred simultaneously with the first Arab invasion, with 642 being the year often given for the Bulgar defeat at Khazar hands. In the aftermath of the Khazar victory, a large exodus of Bulgars migrated westward, eventually establishing the Khanate and later the Kingdom of Bulgaria. Those remaining in so-called Volga Bulgaria paid a steep tribute to the victors and harbored a lasting resentment towards their Khazar overlords over the following 2 centuries. While the Volga Bulgars would play a further role in the Caliphate and Khanate's rivalry in the future, it was back in Balajar that the first major showdown of the two powers would occur a decade later in 652, during the reign of Caliph Uthman. Returning after an absence from the Caucasus theatre to put down a rebellion in Kufa, Abd al-Rahman, together with his brother Salman, again brought a sizable army into Khazar territory, driving for the Khazar capital of Balanjar. Though records are scant, this campaign seems to have had conquest and expansion as its goal, rather than simple raiding, with Armenia and Georgia being brought under Arab control by the Syrian forces of future Caliph Muawiyah between 645 and 646. Moreover, with the last Sassanid Shahenshah, Yezdegerd, having perished in 651, the Caliphate possessed a far more secure base of power to expand from, and ballistae of various sizes accompanied the army. This time, however, the Khazars would not be content to hide behind Balanjar's walls. Resisting strongly with ballistae of their own, the Khazars also made use of sorties to enjoy a degree of initiative and mobility despite the state of siege. The exact timeline and length of the siege are unknown, but the contest would be decided in a pitched battle rather than the attrition of a long siege. The first clash was an ambush, with a party of Muslims being set upon by hidden Khazar archers outside the city walls. This unusual achievement of ambushing a besieging enemy demonstrated that Abd al-Rahman lacked the numbers to properly encircle and entrap Khazar defenders.
I like the fact they built a city around a river that runs right through that. That is cool. That is really cool.
Or feared to spread his besieging army too thin. Though only a minor victory, it emboldened the Khazars to undertake repeated hit-and-run attacks over the following days, with the full force of the defenders surging out on the final day of battle to join a newly arriving relief army of horsemen. Attempting to rally his forces against this combined attack, Abd al-Rahman perished early in the battle, though to his army's credit, this did not bring about a rout. His brother Salman took up the fallen standard, alongside Abu Hurayya ibn al-Dosi, a companion of Muhammad much respected for his photographic memory, who had helped to record and transmit the Quran. This allowed much of the army to carry out a fighting retreat past Derbent to the safety of modern Baku. However, while complete disaster was averted, the Khazars had decisively won the day, inflicting terrible casualties and keeping the body of Abd al-Rahman as a trophy, with the Arab chroniclers even claiming it was used as a talisman to summon rain for decades to follow. After this crushing defeat, the two powers would have relative peace for nearly half a century, though the threat posed by the Khazars would still influence the Caliphate greatly. It is due largely to the Khazar menace that the lands of Armenia, Georgia, and Caucasian Albania.
Is this Mukhtar? And why do I know that? Mukhtar. What have I heard about Mukhtar? Oh. Somebody fill me in. I'm sure there's some battle or something that I've missed where, oh yeah, that was blah, blah, blah. Was a member of... Because I know that name. I just don't know why I know the name. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Were ruled so indirectly. In return for holding the line against the northern nomads, these lands were allowed to keep their Christian nobility and power structures intact, despite their geographic closeness to the Umayyad Caliphate's Syrian core. They were not always successful in this. While the Caliphate was split apart by the Second Fitna, a Khazar invasion under the Khagan Busir would lay waste to these Caucasian client kingdoms in 685, claiming the life of Armenia's ruler, Grigor Mamikonian. However, the victorious Khazars made no effort to hold any territory south of Derbent, or push on into Syria or Persia. The Khazars' modest expansion during this era was mostly westward, subduing groups such as the Alans and Magyars, but some of their most profitable victories would not come on the battlefield, but from playing the cutthroat game of Eastern Roman politics. In 698, the Khazars took in the deposed and exiled Emperor Justinian II and arranged his marriage to Khagan sister, who, after her wedding, became known by the Christian name of Theodora. From intervening in Justinian's repeated loss and seizure of power, the Khazars would twice extort heavy tributes from Constantinople, and even take control of the Crimean Peninsula without risking a man on the battlefield. The first of these came in the form of an enormous bribe from Justinian's usurper, Tiberius III, to remain neutral and deny Justinian the army the Khazars had promised him. Years later, after Justinian's successful return to power with Bulgar rather than Khazar aid, the paranoid tyrant's expedition against his perceived enemies in Crimea drove the region's governor Bardanes to give his fealty to Khagan Basir for protection. Finally, when Bardanes was declared emperor in absentia by rebels against Justinian's rule, Basir collected a second ransom, simply to release the newly declared emperor to his supporters.
Constantinople was like massively important, wasn't it? Because it just seems like it's always involved in something. And it's Istanbul now, correct?
Evidently, the promise of gold and territory clearly outweighed any loyalty Basir felt for his brother-in-law. Though the Romans and Khazars would remain loosely allied through most of this period, the Steppe Empire would prove as adept as the Caliphate in taking advantage of Constantinople's frequent civil strife, and also profited from its periodic bouts of persecution by accepting talented Jewish and heterodox Christian exiles into their relative haven of religious neutrality. Though the Khazar ruling class still held to their shamanic practices, missionaries, a policy of trade and immigration, allowed large Christian, Jewish and Muslim communities to thrive within the Khazar realm. Soon this period of peace came to an end, and the Khazars, stronger than ever, began to pose a serious threat to the Umayyad Caliphate. Between 707 and 712, Derbent and the Gate of Gates would change hands several times, with the Caliphate unable to defend it effectively, being engaged in conquests from Hispania to the Tarim Basin. This weak response only encouraged further Khazar attacks. In 717, an invasion of Caucasian Albania would follow, narrowly repulsed by the Muslims in a Pyrrhic victory. This was followed up in 721 with an invasion of a 30,000-strong Khazar army into Armenia, the beginning of what is called the Second Arab-Khazar War. With the Arab armies still weakened from the recent defeat at Constantinople, the Khazars, under a leader called Bajik, won a decisive victory, trampling over the army of Thubayt al-Narani in the Battle of Marj al-Hajjara and sending the survivors fleeing to Syria. With the enemy dangerously close to the Umayyad core, a second army was assembled in 722 under the newly appointed governor of Armenia, Jarrah ibn Abdullah al-Hakami, and sent to dislodge the Khazars from their new conquests. Were the Arabs unable to stop the Khazar horde at this critical junction, a Khazar invasion of Syria could have followed, threatening to splinter the Umayyad Caliphate entirely. With the stakes high and their armies boasting similar strength, both Jarrah and Bajik approached the coming showdown with caution, the Khazars withdrawing close to the still Arab-held Gate of Gates to avoid fighting in hostile territory and allow easier reinforcement. Jarrah pursued slowly, gathering support from local tribes and nobles as he travelled, rather than rushing to a premature engagement. He would seize the advantage with a shrewd tactical decision after a morning crossing of the Kur River, a short distance from where the Khazars were encamped. Having discovered that one of the tribal leaders he had rallied was loyal to the Khazars, or at least hedging his bets by reporting his movements to the enemy, he ordered his army to make camp, declaring they would rest and reinforce for several days before pressing the attack. When night fell, however, he changed his orders, marching out immediately. As he said,
I guess there's something in... I figured you would kill them, but I guess there's something in not killing them to keep they don't know that you know, but to keep feeding them intel, but now you're feeding them incorrect intel. And then I guess you could get to the battlefield of your choosing then, and then simply kill the person before the battle starts. But yeah, I guess that makes more sense. I just would be worried that you're coming up with a plan, and then they know that you know that they know. Let me rephrase that. They know, meaning the traitor, now knows that you know. Yes, they know that you know. I've just confused myself.
Suspected, the Khazars had been informed of his false intention to wait in place, and he was able to bypass his unprepared enemy to the security of Derbent without a battle, adding its garrison to his forces. The following day, he flipped the script by continuing north into Khazar territory, destructively raiding and plundering as he went, and forcing what had just the previous day been an invading horde to make a frantic defense of its own lands. Though little detail remains of the engagement itself, this confusion and forced haste likely worked to Jarrah's advantage, and when Bajik's army caught it several days later, the Muslims defeated it utterly, seizing forts and plunder, and put.
They would be exhausted too. I'm gonna go ahead and end it right there. But I mean, if they're playing catch up for 2 days, and then they get into a battle. Now, granted, the Arabs are still marching, but you're running to catch up because everything you thought you had a great spot and they just went right around you. So now you're running to catch up. Your people are exhausted and you're going right into battle. Yeah, it doesn't sound like it's going to be good. Let me get to the 18-minute mark again.
Days later, the Muslims defeated it utterly, seizing forts.
Seizing forts. They seized forts. All right. This is part 1. We're going to end it here. These mutts need to go outside, so I've got to let them out. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night.